tonight I am going to be talking about memes and memetics specifically, and I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about the sort of the personification of the meme, which carries its way through my paper. I'm going to try to condense about 30 pages into my 12 minutes, and even I find this topic to be incredibly obtuse. So I hope that I hope that I'm able to do it. If you have questions, you probably won't be alone. So we're going to talk about the hipster meme for just a couple of minutes, and we're talking specifically about the millennial hipster, which is a difference that I draw in the paper in a couple of different places. So if we were to try to define the hipster, and I won't make the funny quotes in there each time, but just initially, if we were defining the hipster culturally, it's one who possesses tastes, social attitudes, and opinions that are deemed cool by the cool, although as a sort of a postmodern caveat, you can't say cool anymore. It's dick now. Dick's the new word for cool. Didn't know. So
swag working today.
So you know hipsters. You've seen them on Law and Order. You sort of know them in your head.
Law and Order.
You have. They're wearing skinny jeans. They're wearing chunky glasses. They're living in Brooklyn. You know the sort of stereotype of them, and I'm going to perpetuate that stereotype for just a couple of minutes by talking about clues that you may be a hipster. I'll let you rate. I'm going to say that I do this first one a lot. I use postmodern all the time in conversation. I use Pomo to do it. I have a shoulder strap message in my I have a skinny tie that is not for the jacket. I do complain about gentrification, but I live in Elizabeth, so I am also contributing to it. It's problematic. Most of my hair fell out, so it doesn't look best when you watch. I myself on the pillow, but a lot of people do. It's a very important thing.
Real jockey.
Now the thing about a hipster is that you can't. You might. These clues might describe you, but you can't actually self-subscribe into hipsterism. You can't call yourself a hipster because the minute you do, you're not cool anymore. You're a poseur at that point, and so. These are clues that you may not be a hipster.
Wait a second. Wait a second. Sunday school?
Were you looking right at me when you actually did?
Yeah, really?
Clues that you might not be. So there's a little bit of lingo that's involved in the meme, and this is all important. Like this is all in good fun. This was a lot of fun to create, but this actually does relate to paper. We'll get there in a minute. So deck, as we learned, is cool. Bust a Moby is to dance, which is what we will be doing after these presentations. Cronkite is boy.
What?
You know that one? Finn is the opposite of deck. It's like the ultimate uncool is Finn, and Get Puffy, somebody else wrote, and I just thought it was really clever because it means to bust a cat and to get shot. And I love the way this cracked me up. And I will say that Get Puffy came from a book called The Hipster Handbook, which is sort of the definitive guide to whether or not one is a hipster. I wish I was clever enough to write that. For the record, specifically for Kenyon, I went to art school.
Drink. There we go. Hold on.
So the hipsters live in sort of a mix, and this is the last time, unfortunately, in this presentation, we'll see our little hipster mascot with his MacBook Pro and his chunky glasses, and his 2% body fat. So hipsters live in the mythos. It's where they live, and it's because they live here that they're interesting to study ethnographically. You know, when you think about this sort of notion, the stereotype of hipster, you can only think of them as one giant subculture that you can't quite place your finger on. There is nowhere to go and see the hipster in the wild. They don't exist in situ. They only exist in the sort of the strange space that floats above us all. So there's a little bit of history of hipsterism that I cover in the paper, and I think that it's important later, so I'll cover it now very briefly. The term was first coined in 1938 by Cab Calloway. And it was actually hepster, H-E-P-S-T-E-R. It's sort of the word of hepcat. And hipsters were people who lived in the Jazz Age, and they were really interested in the Harlem Renaissance, and they were counterculture, and they were cool, but nobody quite knew why, and they lived just a little outside the mainstream norms. And they existed. There were lots of them in lots of places. And they sort of existed exactly as they were from 1938 until exactly 1957, when Naylor wrote an essay called The White Negro and reframed the hipster into the beat. And this was the beginning of the beat generation. This is when they were, they've been writing for a while, but they hadn't been named yet. And Naylor was the first person who really reframed the entire hipster argument into the beats. And the beats sort of pittered out around the Vietnam War. It's hard to be counterculture to that degree and to search for what the beats were searching for when the world was crumbling around you. And so they sort of went underground for a while, but they lived on through the hippies, and they were really, truly pushed underground in the 80s until the indie culture came up with, grunge and punk music, and they were sort of bubbling right beneath the surface, and then they exploded back on the scene in the early 2000s with the millennial hipster. The millennial hipster is what this paper really talks about. So there are a couple of definitions that I think that we need to talk about. I should probably pause right now to actually tell you what the paper is about. Hipsters are fun and all, but it's not 30 pages of hipsters. If only it were. I want to take a notion that was it was presented in 1976 by Richard Dawkins called memetics. It was written in The Selfish Gene as a sister theory to evolutionary genetics, and reframe an argument. Memetics was posed as the idea equivalent of evolutionary genetics, basically an infectious idea. So if genes can be carried through members of a population in complexes to create evolutionary differences, then ideas could conceivably be carried in the same way. And this is basically the notion of the mean. So he wrote it in 1976, and in about 1976 and a half, the theory was completely discredited. There was not a single biological scientist of record who believed that it had any legs at all, because there was so much about it that was unprovable in biological science. I think that being unprovable in biological science is not necessarily the definition that we should keep for discrediting a theory, and so this paper really lays some very early questions out there in how we can reframe this argument and make it into something that fits in cultural studies. So let's work through a few quick definitions to make sure we're on the same page. We're going to start with ethnography, which is sort of my end game. Ethnography is the study and systematic reporting of human culture, and is a recognized form of study in cultural studies. It's about triangulating truths. It's very pomo in that it has, it's layered and complex. It has multiple truths for any population. And then there's the actual definition of meme, which is something that took me a really long time in the paper to get to, until Kim said you probably want to move this to like page 1. Quote, "A meme is an idea, behavior, style, or usage that spreads from person to person within a culture." And it was coined by Richard Dawkins in 1976. Again, I ask you to think of it as an infectious idea. More than an idea. Ideas happen individually in our heads. Infectious ideas happen in my head and move to yours. There's a famous example of a meme that is the spoked wagon wheel. And I might make a wagon wheel spoke, so bring it to the village or wherever you take wagon wheels. And because I had the idea to put spokes in my wagon wheel, now Jennifer Hall has the idea to put spokes in her wagon wheel. Now Kim has the idea to put spokes in her wagon wheel. You take them to other places and the idea spreads. And within your subculture it becomes a norm. It becomes a sort of a vessel for cultural identity creation. So what are memes not? Not memes. Memes as a term. Memes, the term meme has been subjugated in popular culture to be things like this.
Is that Hitler cat on the right?
Like this. This feels so mean. Can't you just hear him saying? And like this. These are my personal favorite. These are called memes in popular culture, but they're actually image macros, and they're a completely different field of study, and they should be studied because they are mildly mimetic in sort of a bizarre way. But these are not the memes that we're talking about. We're talking about memes as a concept and a theory. These are memes as a thing. still a heck of a lot of fun to look through.